So, after 2 months of deadlock, President Macron has named the new French Prime Minister. It is to be Michel Barnier, the EU's Brexit negotiator and the former European Commissioner. He hails from the right of French politics, a veteran of the party Les Républicains. Indeed, the immediate challenge now for Barnier is to garner enough support from Parliament, from the right and from the left, to form a stable government. The elections back in June and July delivered a hung parliament with a left-wing bloc winning the most seats, but far from enough for a majority. Well, minutes after that news dropped today, reaction to Barnier's appointment began to pour in. The far-right National Rally, which has become a de facto kingmaker in the hunt for Prime Minister, did not dismiss Barnier out of hand. Let's show you here something on X from Jordan Bardella. He said that the 11 million voters of the National Rally deserve our respect, and we will judge Barnier's general policy speech, his budgetary decisions and his actions. Bardella then weighing up whether or not to throw the weight of the party behind Barnier. Now, meanwhile, the influential far-left leader of the France Unbowed party, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, has strongly criticised the appointment of Barnier. He's argued the election has been stolen from French voters.
L'élection a donc été volée au peuple français.
The election has thus been stolen from the French people. The message has been denied. And now we see a prime minister appointed with the permission and perhaps even on the suggestion of the National Rally. Even though the second round of the parliamentary elections was wholly focused on ensuring the National Rally should not succeed.
Avait été tout entier concentré à faire échec à ce rassemblement national.
Well, let's cross live now to the Élysée Palace. That's the seat of President Macron. Our reporter Claire Paquelin is there for us. So, Claire, it has been weeks of deadlock. We do now finally have white smoke. We have the name of Michel Barnier. Tell us why you think the president has gone for him.
Well, to some extent, at least, Michel Barnier is seen as being Macron compatible. He's a right-wing politician from the Les Républicains party. He's not an extreme. He's not on the far right. And it's seen unlikely that he would try to totally unpick 7 years' worth of reforms and policies that Emmanuel Macron has put in place since he became president. Crucially as well, it was seen that Michel Barnier was the most likely, although it's not a guarantee, but the most likely to get the support of Parliament, because that really is the question. He needs the support of Parliament, because if he doesn't get it, well, then members of Parliament can simply vote to overthrow him in a vote of no confidence. The question is, though, who exactly in Parliament will support Michel Barnier? He'll have his Les Républicains, the right party. He'll have centrists from Emmanuel Macron's party, although they've already made a statement. The Renaissance Party has made a statement saying they won't be writing Michel Barnier a blank cheque. But of course, to some extent, he's going to have to rely on the far-right party of Marine Le Pen. And if Michel Barnier finds himself relying on that party, well, is that really a desirable situation for him? Because while Marine Le Pen's party could give support initially, that support could be taken away quickly at any point throughout his tenure as Prime Minister.
And it is worth, Claire, dwelling a little bit or analysing a little bit the reaction from the left today. As I said at the beginning of the programme, it was that left-wing bloc, the New Popular Front, that won the most seats in Parliament after the elections in July. But we do not have a politician from the left for Prime Minister. As you say, he's a figure who's more likely to work with the National Rally. And Jean-Luc Mélenchon already saying, look, he feels the election has been stolen.
Certainly, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon is an influential voice. It's worth noting that that left-wing bloc, the New Popular Front, that was cobbled together hastily just after Emmanuel Macron announced that he was holding snap parliamentary elections before the summer. That New Popular Front spans a pretty wide part of the political spectrum, from the far left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, all the way up the Greens, the Communists, the Socialists as well. So it remains to be seen. Michel Barnier may at times find himself trying to reach out to the more centrist socialist politicians if he can't get the support from the far right on certain policies. Certainly, Michel Barnier is going to try to build bridges, build coalitions, make friends wherever he can. He is known as being a tough negotiator. He drove a hard bargain. That's certainly how he's seen in the UK. Drove a hard bargain in those Brexit negotiations when he was the chief negotiator for the European Union. But can he drive that kind of a hard bargain? Can he get the support of France's very divided parliament? Well, that's what we will be looking at now in the next few weeks and months to come.
Claire Pacquelin live for us outside the Élysée Palace for the moment. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get you plenty of analysis then on that appointment of Michel Barnier. We're going to be talking about this story throughout the afternoon. With me here in the studios, our French politics editor, Mark Perelman. Also joining us live on the line is Andrew Smith. He's an expert in French politics and in history as well at Queen Mary University. I'll come to you in a moment, Mr. Smith, but first I'd like to bring in Mark Perelman. Mark, Barnier and Macron, is it fair to say they have a close relationship? What can you tell us about how they might work together?
They don't have a close relationship, but they've worked together before when Michel Barnier was negotiating Brexit. It was during the presidency of François Hollande, and Emmanuel Macron, as we may remember, used to work in the presidential palace for François Hollande, especially when it came to economic issues. And so they know each other. Clearly, in terms of policy, there is a lot of agreement on Europe. Obviously, Michel Barnier has fulfilled has filled every job. He has been a member of the European Parliament, a member of the European Commission. He has been also negotiating Brexit. Yeah, and he was also a junior minister for European affairs in the French government. So clearly, this is an important issue for Emmanuel Macron, not only because Emmanuel Macron is very much pro-Europe. It's because France is under scrutiny from the European Union for its excessive budget, its excessive debt. And so having Michel Barnier is a way to send a reassuring message to Brussels that you're going to have a safe pair of hands at the helm of the government. And so this is important. So Europe, yes. On the issue of the budget, which is related, as I just discussed, Emmanuel Macron is very concerned that the financial markets are watching very carefully and very worryingly what's happening in France. We're seeing ballooning the deficit, ballooning debt. We just learned that actually it might be much worse than expected, according to what the outgoing government is now telling MPs and so on in Parliament. And so Emmanuel Macron is very worried, and so he wants a very, very firm hand on, much more austerity and make sure the budget doesn't get out of control, because there'll be a vote for the new budget in the coming weeks. And on Emmanuel Macron's pension system reform, which he very, very much wants to keep, and probably the reason why he refused to appoint prime minister from the left. Bernard Cazeneuve, a former socialist prime minister, was very much talked about. He apparently told Emmanuel Macron that he would at least suspend this reform. We know Michel Barnier, as a traditional conservative, has always been in favor of pushing the retirement age. It's now 64. He even mentioned 65 at some point. So there'll be no daylight between Emmanuel Macron and Michel Barnier. But the main question, and this is why your question about a close relationship is important, is whether they will be able to work together. Emmanuel Macron is a president who's always had a rather weak prime minister. Édouard Philippe, Elisabeth Borne, Jean Castex, Gabriel Attal, pretty much unknown until they were appointed. Michel Barnier has a lot of experience. He's the oldest prime minister under the Fifth Republic, and so he'll probably not be easily pushed around by Emmanuel Macron, so we'll have to see how they work together.
Indeed, and Andrew Smith, look, Michel Barnier, no stranger to difficult tasks. He was, as we've been saying, in charge of those Brexit negotiations on behalf of the European Union. Do you think now he can take on this massive challenge of trying to get enough support in Parliament, in the French Parliament, to form a stable government now?
I think it's pretty clear that Barnier is not a kind of table-thumping big beast, but he is someone who's very experienced. He's someone who's very serious, and he is someone who I think will certainly be able to command that majority on the right, from the centre stretching way out to the far right as well. I think increasingly what we've seen probably in this appointment is that, first of all, it looks like Emmanuel Macron cares a lot more about the budget deficit than he does about the outcome of the legislative elections. But also, I think it's a sign that, the social policy that someone like Michel Barnier has spoken about in the past, if we remember when he ran in those Republican primaries, he talked about things like, really quite extreme immigration policies, a moratorium on immigration that put him at odds with the European Courts of Justice, for example. So this is someone I think who appeals certainly to the right and the far right. And I think it's someone who will protect the budget, exactly as we just heard there, which Macron has been very concerned about as well. So that idea, I think that twin focus of somebody who is willing to toe the party line on reducing the budget, but also able to court the kind of affections of the far right with some quite strongly, I think, anti-immigrant rhetoric, perhaps, and willing to push a kind of right-wing government, effectively. This is really more of a lurch, again, during Macron's presidency, towards the right. There's very little en même temps going on here that we can see. This is very much a kind of shift to the right, I think.
Well, I want to bring Mark Perelman back in on that question then. Andrew Smith saying he is a figure clearly who appeals to the right and also to the far right. And the National Rally have become a sort of de facto kingmaker, haven't they, in this hunt for a prime minister? Why is that, given that it should be, on paper, the left that have the most influence, given that they won the most seats?
Yes, but they didn't want enough seats to have real power in Parliament. They're very far. I mean, all the three blocs in Parliament, Emmanuel Macron's bloc, the left and the far right, are very far from an absolute majority. And so this has been the issue. And basically, the National Rally has indeed been a kingmaker. Marine Le Pen, its leader, I mean, Jordan Bardella is now the de facto leader, but the real leader is Marine Le Pen. She's been communicating with Emmanuel Macron, and she's been the reason why Emmanuel Macron's one of the first choices for prime minister was another politician from the conservative camp, Xavier Bertrand. But she's the bitter and personal enemy of Marine Le Pen. Mm-hmm. They've had really infighting for years. And she basically said, no, there's no way. If he is your candidate, I will vote a motion of defiance with the left, and he won't stand a chance. Clearly, Emmanuel Macron decided to come up with Michel Barnier, and Marine Le Pen has told Emmanuel Macron privately and now publicly that we'll give him a shot. We'll have to wait, as you read earlier, for his general policy speech, what he proposes for the budget, and we'll see. But obviously, this means that she holds Michel Barnier's fate in her hands, because if she decides that at some point she doesn't agree with him, that maybe he's too pro-European, not tough enough on crime, not tough enough on immigration, she could say, well, you know what, I'll join hands with the left and we'll make the government fall. Because that's the problem. Michel Barnier is appointed. Okay, now he has to form a government. Not so easy, because he comes from a small party. He has to get people from other parties to show that it's a kind of open arms government, that it's not a small government of only technocrats or people who think exactly the same. And then he has not so much to get a vote of confidence in Parliament, because we're not there anymore, but to avoid a motion of no confidence. And Marine Le Pen has said, okay, we'll see. But what is true today might not be true come November, and we might see governments come and go in the next few months in France. It's very unusual, but the political situation is unprecedented.
I do want to talk to you a bit more about that question of a vote of confidence, but let's just bring back Andrew Smith briefly on the left. Andrew, I mean, there is real anger. Clearly, we played that soundbite earlier from Jean-Luc Mélenchon talking about this election being stolen. It's not just him, though. The socialists, the Greens, all wary of this appointment today of Barnier. Is it fair that they're criticising the president now for suggesting this isn't particularly democratic, given the number of votes that the left-wing bloc won? What do you reckon?
I think it certainly highlights there is a bit of a kind of democratic deficit going on. Clearly, we can see, that this is not really representing a kind of huge mandate. There was no swell of support for someone like Michel Barnier. Remember, he came third place in the presidential primary for a party that won 6% of the vote. So clearly there is no swell of public mandates for Michel Barnier. I think the left, it can be dangerous rhetoric, like Mélenchon, to talk about stealing elections, to talk about that kind of thing. I would look to the comments of somebody like Marine Tondelier about the idea that it looks like a kind of mockery of what was being pushed for. I think the big thing we're seeing is that Macron, the presidency, ran scared of the New Popular Front agenda, the platform on which they were elected. They ran scared of the spending commitments that were attached to that. And that really meant that the Popular Front could not rely on the centre, it could not rely on Macron's bloc, because they wanted to unpick all of the things they saw as achievements over the previous parliaments. And obviously they couldn't reach to the right because of their extreme differences. That isolates the Popular Front to within their own confines, this kind of minority within a plurality of the wider parties. Even if it is the largest kind of within that bloc, it's not large enough, as we've heard. So I think there is really a kind of a right to be frustrated at what's going on. There's a right to feel annoyed about this, but also a need to look for moments of challenge and kind of inflection. And perhaps there's opportunities to look for ministerial appointments for either the Socialist Party or the Greens within the context of a Barnier government, potentially as some way to try and kind of leaven that a little bit in terms of the overall outcome of this appointment.
And Mark Perelman, then, you were talking about a vote of confidence and saying that perhaps that danger is immediately put to one side. Is it for Michel Barnier? Just tell us about the procedure now. Will he not face a vote of confidence immediately in Parliament? From the left, perhaps?
Well, he could from the left. But normally what happens when you appoint a prime minister, he gives a maiden policy speech, general policy speech, to Parliament, and then he asked the Parliament for a vote of confidence on what he just said. But that's not mandatory. Actually, the previous prime ministers of Emmanuel Macron, since they only had a relative majority, they decided not to do this. But you can have a motion of no confidence that's tabled by the opposition. And you need to reach 289 votes, the majority, but if you add the votes from the National Rally and the votes from the left, the leftist coalition, you reach easily that number. So obviously, if they decide, okay, we're not going to accept this, the prime minister doesn't have enough votes. So basically, Emmanuel Macron, and this is why it lasted for days and weeks and so on, was testing the waters. He was telling the left, okay, if I appoint, let's say, Bernard Cazeneuve, former prime minister from the Socialist Party, will you support him? He heard, not so much because he's too much of a centrist. The National Rally told him no. Xavier Bertrand, we just talked about it. It was a no-go. So he was forced to find someone that's palatable to it, either the leftist bloc or the National Rally, because if not, it won't last. But obviously, you're, under the threats of Marine Le Pen saying, you know what, after all, Michel Barnier, it's not going to work. That's it. And then we have to change and so on. So it could be like this for a while. It's going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of government he forms. Because if he's able to bring in, some people from other parties, there won't be ministers from the National Rally. I mean, that's not even possible. But there could be ministers from civil society, maybe some ministers from the center left, the Greens, and so on. Yes, the parties are saying the election was stolen. We should have had a shot at a prime ministership, but that's it. Now Michel Barnier has been appointed. Some might say, okay, we might try to influence from inside what we're not able to influence from outside. So this will be really, really interesting, and that will determine in a large way how he will fare in Parliament.
Thank you very much, Mark Perelman, for us there. Just one final question for you, Andrew Smith, if I may. On the optics of this, we have France's youngest Prime Minister stepping aside now for someone who will be its oldest. Barnier is 73. What do you think about the optics of that?
It's a challenging one, isn't it? It probably shows that one of the things you can say about Michel Barnier is that he doesn't have any ambitions for the next presidential election. We've, of course, seen already another former Prime Minister declare his intentions as regards the upcoming presidential elections after Emmanuel Macron's term ends. But unless France goes the way of the United States, it looks like someone like Barnier is probably kind of older than would be expected for a presidential candidate. We know he's a hugely experienced figure. We know he's been a minister. We know he's been a commissioner. He's done all these things in the past. And this is more of a last hurrah, perhaps, than a platform for a new campaign. What kind of optics does it have? I think it says, actually, that if people have been talking about chaos, if they've been talking about political blockages, then this looks like a kind of serious, experienced figure who's been trusted with the tiller. And I think this is really a message as much to France's European allies about France's budget deficit and its need to bring that down. It's a message about stability, trying to repair some of the shock that followed Emmanuel Macron's strange dissolution. And actually, this is about trying to convey an image of stability and sort of stable institutions in the face of quite kind of extreme political manoeuvring around it. So in terms of the optics, I think that's what they're going for. I think there will be protests against it. We know they've already been called for by the left. We'll see how these things develop. And of course, it remains to be seen how that government will come together, whether or not Barnier will be able to be successful.
Andrew Smith, it's been great to get your views on this afternoon. Thanks very much indeed, Andrew Smith, talking to us there from Queen Mary University. Well, let's go live to Brussels on the programme there. Pierre Banizet is standing by for us. Pierre, look, Michel Barnier is somebody who's had two major European roles, Brexit negotiator for the EU and the head of the EU Commission. Tell us then about his long career as a sort of European statesman.
He was, in a way, the longest-serving European Commissioner because he's had three European careers, three different ones, actually, because he was first nominated as the French Commissioner in 1999 when there were two commissioners by country at that time. He was Commissioner for Regional Policy, which was not the main point of his 5-year term. The main point, the main focus of what he did then was to sit in the Convention for the Future of Europe, the convention that gave the constitutional treaty, which was rejected by the Dutch and the French in 2005. Then he went back to France in order to be a minister in Paris and came back for a second term of commissioner, where he was nominated at the Common Market as the Common Market Commissioner, and that's where his political commitment really gave all its measure, and he was the one who pushed for very strong reform of the European Common Market, and that was his the second leg of his European voyage, if you want, because after that he came back because he was nominated by Jean-Claude Juncker as Mr. Brexit, the one who negotiated the exit of the United Kingdom.
Indeed, and that was a thorny, long, difficult job that he had as the Brexit negotiator. What was Barnier's reputation in that period?
Well, that's where he gave his full measure, if you want. First, he started out by learning the language, and something which he had never bothered to do before. He learned English in a few years at the start of his stint as a Brexit negotiator. That started out quite well for him because he did it the old politician's way. That is, he went throughout Europe talking to fishermen, to agriculturists, farmers, and so on, in order to be able to have the full picture. And he was able to talk with Downing Street. He was able to talk with the negotiators in front of him, even though from the British side they changed quite a lot. And he managed to find a way to have this treaty, these exit treaties signed, and to follow it up afterwards when the United Kingdom came out. And he was rather respected from the other side of the channel, what the Brussels, they call the wrong side of the channel nowadays. And he was quite respected in Europe as well, because he's a hard worker. That was his main reputation here during this stint as a negotiator.
Pierre Benezet live in Brussels there, talking to us a bit about the European view of France's incoming Prime Minister, Michel Barnier. Thanks very much indeed, Pierre. Good to hear from you.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take a quick break on Around the World now. Do stay with us, though. We'll have much more news still to come, including more analysis of the appointment of Michel Barnier as France's new Prime Minister.